His leer was like icy wind. "Go on," I said. He closed his eyes, still smiling. "Pick an apocalypse. Any apocalypse. A sea of black oil and dead things. No wind, no light, nothing stirring, not even an ant, a spider. A silent universe. Such is the end of the flicker of time, the brief, hot fuse of events and ideas, set off accidentally and snuffed out accidentally by man. Not a real ending, of course, not even a beginning. Mere ripple in time's stream." I squinted. "That really could happen?" "It has happened," he said, and smiled as if it pleased him. "In the future, I am the witness." I thought about it for a while, remembering the harp, then shook my head. "I don't believe you." "It will come." I went on squinting at him, hand on my mouth. He could lie. He was evil enough. He shook his ponderous head. "Ah, man's cunning mind," he said, and cackled. "Merely a new complexity, a new event, new set of nonce rules, generating further nonce rules, down and down and down. Things lock on, you know. The Devonian fish, the juxtaposed thumb, the fontanelle, technology. Click, 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 click." "I think you're lying," I said, confused again, a swirl in words. "I noticed that. You'll never know. It must be very frustrating to be caged, like a Chinaman's cricket, in a limited mind." His cackle lacked spirit this time. He was growing very weary of my presence. "You said fiddlesticks," I said. "Why is it fiddlesticks if I stop giving people heart attacks over nothing? Why shouldn't one change one's ways, improve one's character?" I must have been an interesting sight that instant, big, shaggy monster, intense and earnest, bent like a priest at his prayers. He shrugged. "Whatever you like. Do as you think best." "But why?" Why? Ridiculous question. Why anything? My advice to you—" I clenched my fists, though it was absurd, of course. One does not swing at dragons. "No, why?" The dragon tipped up his great tusked head, stretched his neck, sighed fire. "Ah, Grendel," he said. He seemed that instant almost to rise to pity. "You improve them, my boy. Can't you see that yourself? You stimulate them. You make them think and scheme. You drive them to poetry, science, religion, all that makes them what they are for as long as they last. You are, so to speak, the brute existent by which they learn to define themselves. The exile, captivity, death they shrink from, the blunt facts of their mortality, their abandonment, that's what you make them recognize, embrace. You are mankind, or man's condition, inseparable as the mountain climber and the mountain. If you withdraw, you will instantly be replaced. Brute existents, you know, are a dime a dozen. No sentimental trash, then. If man's the irrelevance that interests you, stick with him. Scare him to glory. It's all the same in the end. Matter and motion, simple or complex. No difference, finally. Death, transfiguration. Ashes to ashes, and slime to slime. Amen. I was sure he was lying, or anyway half sure, flattering me into tormenting them because he in his sullen hole loved viciousness. I said, "Let them find some other brute existent, whatever that is. I refuse." "Do," he said, leering scornfully. "Do something else by all means. Alter the future. Make the world a better place in which to live. Help the poor, feed the hungry, be kind to idiots. What a challenge!" He no longer looked at me, no longer made any pretense of telling the truth. "Personally," he said, "my great ambition is to count all this." He waved vaguely at the treasure around him, "and possibly sort it into piles. Know thyself, that's my dictum. Know how much you've got, and beware of strangers." I scraped away rubies and emeralds with the side of my foot. "Let me tell you what the Shaper said." "Spare me, I beg you." He covered his ears with his claws, gave a hideous grin. But I was stubborn. "He said that the greatest of gods made the world, every wonder-bright plain and the turning seas. He said, 'Ridiculous!' Why? What god? Where? Life force, you mean? The principle of process? God as the history of chance?" In some way that I couldn't explain, I knew that his scorn of my childish credulity was right. "Nevertheless, something will come of all this," I said. "Nothing," he said. "A brief pulsation in the black hole of eternity. My advice to you—" "Wait and see," I said. He shook his head. "My advice to you, my violent friend, is to seek out gold and sit on it." Chapter 6. Nothing was changed, everything was changed, by my having seen the dragon. It's one thing to listen, full of scorn and doubt, to poets' versions of time past and visions of time to come. It's another to know as coldly and simply as my mother knows her pile of bones what is. Whatever I may have understood or misunderstood in the dragon's talk, something much deeper stayed with me, became my aura. Futility, doom, became a smell in the air, pervasive and acrid as the dead smell after a forest fire. My scent and the world's, the scent of trees, rocks, waterways, wherever I went. But there was one thing worse. I discovered that the dragon had put a charm on me. No weapon could cut me. I could walk up to the mead hall whenever I pleased, and they were powerless. My heart became darker because of that. Though I scorned them, sometimes hated them, there had been something between myself and men when we could fight. Now, invulnerable, I was as solitary as one live tree in a vast landscape of coal. Needless to say, I misunderstood in the beginning. I thought it an advantage. It was the height of summer. harvest season in the first year of what I have come to call my war with Hrothgar. The night air was filled with the smell of apples and shocked grain, and I could hear the noise in the mead hall from a mile away. I moved toward it, drawn as always as if by some kind of curse. I meant not to be seen that night. For all the dragon's talk, I had no intention of terrifying Hrothgar's thanes for nothing. I had not begun at that time my systematic raids. In fact, I hadn't yet admitted to myself that it was war. I killed stragglers now and then, with a certain grim pleasure very different from that which I got from cracking a cow's skull. But I'd never yet struck at the hall, hadn't even revealed myself there, except on that one ridiculous night when I walked up and tried to join them. I hunkered down at the edge of the forest, looking up the long hill at the mead hall lights. I could hear the shaper's song. I no longer remember exactly what he sang. I know only that it had a strange effect on me. It no longer filled me with doubt and distress, loneliness, shame. It enraged me. It was their confidence, maybe, their blissful, swinish ignorance, their bumptious self-satisfaction, and, worst of all, their hope. I went closer, darting from cowshed to cowshed, and finally up to the wall. I found a crack and peeked in. I do remember what he said, now that I think about it, or some of it. He spoke of how God had been kind to the Scyldings, sending so rich a harvest. The people sat beaming, bleary-eyed and fat, nodding their approval of God. He spoke of God's great generosity in sending them so wise a king. They all raised their cups to God and Hrothgar smiled, bits of food in his beard. The shaper talked of how God had vanquished their enemies and filled up their houses with precious treasure, how they were the richest, most powerful people on earth, how here and here alone in all the world men were free, and heroes were brave, and virgins were virgins. He ended the song, and people clapped and shouted their praise and filled their golden cups. All around their bubble of stupidity, I could feel the broom of the dragon. Then a stick snapped behind me, and the same instant a dog barked. A helmeted, chain-mailed guard leaped out at me, sword in 2 hands above his head, prepared to split me. I jerked back, but there was something in the way, and I fell. I tried to roll, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the sword coming, and I knew I couldn't escape it. I went limp, the way animals sometimes do at the moment of the predator's leap. Nothing happened. I was as surprised as the guard. We both stared, I sprawling helpless on my back, the sword across my belly, the guard leaning forward, still holding the hilt as if afraid to let it go. His beard and nose stuck out through the cheek-plates, and his eyes, in the shadowed recess of the helmet, were like 2 dark holes in a tree. My heart was pounding, filling my chest with pain. Still neither of us moved. Then, almost the same instant, the guard screamed, and I roared like a bull gone mad to drive him off. He let go of the sword and tried to retreat, walking backward, but he tripped on the dog and fell. I laughed, a little wild, and reached out, fast as a striking snake, for his leg. In a second I was up on my feet again. He screamed, dangling, and then there were others all around me. They threw javelins and axes, and one of the men caught the guard's thrashing arms and tried to yank him free. I held on, but except for that I couldn't act. It was as if I too was drunk on mead. I saw their weapons come flying straight at me, saw them touch my fur and drop quietly in the grass. Then, little by little, I understood. I felt laughter welling up inside me at the dragon charm, at Hrothgar's whispering and trembling by the mead hall door, at everything, the oblivious trees and sky, the witless moon. I'd meant them no harm, but they'd attacked me again, as always. They were crazy. And now at last the grim laughter came pouring out, as uncontrollable as the dragon's laugh, and I wanted to say, "Lo, God has vanquished mine enemies." But that made me laugh harder, though even now my heart raced, and in spite of it all I was afraid of them. I backed away, still holding the screaming guard. They merely stared, with their useless weapons drawn, their shoulders hunched against my laughter. When I'd reached a safe distance, I held up the guard to taunt them, then held him still higher and leered into his face. He went silent, looking at me upside down in horror, suddenly knowing what I planned. As if casually, in plain sight of them all, I bit his head off, crunched through the helmet and skull with my teeth, and, holding the jerking, blood-slippery body in 2 hands, sucked the blood that sprayed like a hot, thick geyser from his neck. It got all over me. Women fainted. Men backed toward the hall. I fled with the body to the woods, heart churning, boiling like a flooded ditch, with glee. Some 3 or 4 nights later I launched my first raid. I burst in when they were all asleep, snatched 7 from their beds, and slit them open and devoured them on the spot. I felt a strange, unearthly joy. It was as if I'd made some incredible discovery, like my discovery long ago of the moonlit world beyond the mere. I was transformed. I was a new focus for the clutter of space I stood in. If the world had once imploded on the tree where I waited, trapped and full of pain, it now blasted outward, away from me, screeching terror. I had become, myself, the mamma I'd searched the cliffs for once in vain. But that merely hints at what I mean. I had become something, as if born again. I had hung between possibilities before, between the cold truths I knew and the heart-sucking, conjuring tricks of the Shaper. Now that was past. I was Grendel, ruiner of mead halls, wrecker of kings. But also, as never before, I was alone. I do not complain of it. Talking, complaining, filling the world I walk with words. But I admit it was a jolt. It was a few raids later. The mead hall door burst open at my touch exactly as before, and, for once, that night I hesitated. Men sat up in their beds, snatched their helmets, swords, and shields from the covers beside them, and, shouting brave words that came out like squeals, they threw their legs over the sides to stumble toward me. Someone yelled, "Remember this hour, ye thanes of Hrothgar, the boasts you made as the mead bowl passed. Remember our good king's gift of rings, and pay him with all your might for his many kindnesses." Damned pompous fools. I hurled a bench at the closest. They all cowered back. I stood waiting, bent forward with my feet apart, flat-footed, till they ended their interminable orations. I was hunched like a wrestler, moving my head from side to side, making sure no sneak slipped up on me. I was afraid of them from habit, and as the 4 or 5 drunkest of the thanes came toward me, shaking their weapons and shouting at me, my idiotic fear of them mounted, but I held my ground. Then, with a howl, one plunged at me, sword above his head in both fists. I let it come. The charm held good. I closed my hand on the blade, and snatched it from the drunken thane's hand, and hurled it the length of the hall. It clattered on the fireplace stones, and fell to the stone floor, ringing. I seized him and crushed him. Another one came at me, gloating in his bleary-eyed heroism, maniacally joyful because he had bragged that he would die for his king, and he was doing it. He did it. Another one came, reeling and whooping, trying to make his eyes focus. I laughed. It was outrageous. They came, they fell, howling insanity about brothers, fathers, glorious Hrothgar, and God. But though I laughed, I felt trapped, as hollow as a rotten tree. The mead hall seemed to stretch for miles, out to the edges of time and space, and I saw myself killing them, on and on and on, as if mechanically, without contest. I saw myself swelling like bellows on their blood, a meaningless smudge in a universe dead as old wind over bones, abandoned except for the burnt blood scent of the dragon. All at once I began to smash things, benches, tables, hanging beds, a rage as meaningless and terrible as everything else. Then, as a crowning absurdity, my salvation that moment, came the man the Thanes called Unferth. He stood across the hall from me, youthful, intense, cold, sober. He was taller than the others. He stood out among his fellow Thanes like a horse in a herd of cows. His nose was as porous and dark as volcanic rock. His light beard grew in patches. "Stand back," he said. The drunken little men around me backed away. The hall floor between us, Unferth and myself, lay open. "Monster, prepare to die," he said. Very righteous. The wings of his nostrils flared and quivered like an outraged priest's. I laughed. "Arg!" I said. I spit bits of bone. He glanced behind him, making sure he knew exactly where the window was. "Are you right with your God?" he said. I laughed somewhat more fiercely. He was one of those. He took a tentative step toward me, then paused, holding his sword out and shaking it. "Tell them in hell that Unferth, son of Ecglaf, sent you, known far and wide in these Scanian lands as a hero among the Scyldings." He took a few side steps, like one wrestler circling another, except that he was 30 feet away. The maneuver was ridiculous. "Come, come," I said. "Let me tell them I was sent by Sideways Walker." He frowned, trying to puzzle out my speech. I said it again, louder and slower, and a startled look came over him. Even now he didn't know what I was saying, but it was clear to him, I think, that I was speaking words. He got a cunning look, as if getting ready to offer a deal, the look men have when they fight with men instead of poor, stupid animals. He was shaken, and to get back his nerve he spoke some more. "For many months, unsightly monster, you've murdered men as you pleased in Hrothgar's hall. Unless you can murder me as you've murdered lesser men, I give you my word those days are done forever. The king has given me splendid gifts. He will see tonight that his gifts have not gone for nothing. Prepare to fall, foul thing. This one red hour makes your reputation or mine." I shook my head at him, wickedly smiling. "Reputation," I said, pretending to be much impressed. His eyebrows shot up. He'd understood me. No doubt of it now. "You can talk," he said. He backed away a step. I nodded, moving in on him. Near the center of the room, there was a trestle table, piled high with glossy apples. an evil idea came over me. So evil it made me shiver as I smiled, and I sidled across to the table. "So, you're a hero," I said. He didn't get it, and I said it twice more before I gave up in disgust. I talked on anyway, let him get what he could, come try for reputation when he pleased. "I'm impressed," I said. "I've never seen a live hero before. I thought they were only in poetry." It must be a terrible burden, though, being a hero, glory reaper, harvester of monsters. Everybody always watching you, weighing you, seeing if you're still heroic. You know how it is. Sooner or later, the harvest virgin will make her mistake in the haystack. I laughed. The dragon's scent in the room grew stronger, as if my teasing were bringing the old beast near. I picked up an apple and polished it lightly and quickly on the hair of my arm. I had my head bowed, smiling, looking at him up through my eyebrows. "Dread creature," he said. I went on polishing the apple, smiling. "And the awful inconvenience," I said, "always having to stand erect, always having to find noble language. It must wear on a man." He looked hurt and slightly indignant. He'd understood. "Wretched shape," he said. "But no doubt there are compensations," I said. "The pleasant feeling of vast superiority, the easy success with women." "Monster!" he howled. "And the joy of self-knowledge, that's a great compensation. The easy and absolute certainty that whatever the danger, however terrible the odds, you'll stand firm, behave with the dignity of a hero, yea, even to the grave." "No more talk!" he yelled. His voice broke. He lifted his sword to make a run at me, and I laughed, howled, and threw an apple at him. He dodged, and then his mouth dropped open. I laughed harder, threw another. He dodged again. "Hey!" he yelled. A forgivable lapse. And now I was raining apples at him and laughing myself weak. He covered his head, roaring at me. He tried to charge through the barrage, but he couldn't make 3 feet. I slammed one straight into his pock-marked nose, and blood spurted out like joining rivers. It made the floor slippery, and he went down. Clang! I bent double with laughter. Poor jangler, Unferth, tried to take advantage of it, charging at me on all fours, snatching at my ankles, but I jumped back and tipped over the table on him, half burying him in apples as red and innocent as smiles. He screamed and thrashed, trying to get at me, and at the same time trying to see if the others were watching. He was crying. Only a boy, famous hero or not, a poor, miserable virgin. "Such is life," I said, and mocked a sigh. "Such is dignity." Then I left him. I got more pleasure from that apple fight than from any other battle in my life. I was sure, going back to my cave, it was nearly dawn, that he wouldn't follow. They never did. But I was wrong. He was a new kind of shielding. He must have started tracking me that same morning. A driven man, a maniac. He arrived at the cave 3 nights later. I was asleep. I woke up with a start, not sure what it was that had awakened me. I saw my mother moving slowly and silently past me, blue murder in her eyes. I understood instantly, not with my mind, but with something quicker. and I darted around in front to block her way. I pushed her back. There he lay, gasping on his belly like a half-drowned rat. His face and throat and arms were a crosshatch of festering cuts, the leavings of the fire snakes. His hair and beard hung straight down like seaweed. He panted for a long time, then rolled his eyes up, vaguely in my direction. In the darkness he couldn't see me, though I could see him. He closed his hand on the sword hilt, and jiggled the sword a little, too weak to raise it off the floor. "Unferth has come," he said. I smiled. My mother moved back and forth like a bear behind me, stirred up by the smell. He crawled toward me, the sword noisily scraping on the cave's rock floor. Then he gave out again. "It will be sung," he whispered, then paused again to get wind. "It will be sung year on year, and age on age, that Unferth went down through the burning lake." He paused to pant, "and gave his life in battle with the world-rim monster." He let his cheek fall to the floor, and lay panting for a long time, saying nothing. It dawned on me that he was waiting for me to kill him. I did nothing. I sat down and put my elbows on my knees and my chin on my fists, and merely watched. He lay with his eyes closed, and began to get his breath back. He whispered, "It's all very well to make a fool of me before my fellow thanes. All very well to talk about dignity and noble language and all the rest, as if heroism were a golden trinket, mere outward show and hollow. But such is not the case, monster. That is to say—" He paused, seemed to grope. He'd lost his train of thought. I said nothing, merely waited, blocking my mother by stretching out an arm when she came near. "Even now you mock me," Unferth whispered. I had an uneasy feeling. He was close to tears. If he wept, I was not sure I could control myself. His pretensions to uncommon glory were one thing. If for even an instant he pretended to misery like mine— "You think me a witless fool," he whispered. "Oh, I heard what you said. I caught your nasty insinuations. I thought heroes were only in poetry, you said, implying that what I've made of myself is mere fairy-tale stuff." He raised his head, trying to glare at me, but his blind stare was in the wrong direction, following my mother's pacing. "Well, it's not, let me tell you." His lips trembled, and I was certain he would cry. I would have to destroy him from pure disgust. But he held it. He let his head fall again, and sucked for air. A little of his voice came back, so that he no longer had to whisper, but could bring out his words in a slightly reedy whine. "Poetry's trash, mere clouds of words, comfort to the hopeless, but this is no cloud, no syllabled phantom that stands here shaking its sword at you." I let the slight exaggeration pass. But Unferth didn't. "Or lies here," he said. "A hero is not afraid to face cruel truth." That reminded him, apparently, of what he'd meant to say before. "You talk of heroism as noble language, dignity. It's more than that, as my coming here has proved. No man above us will ever know whether Unferth died here or fled to the hills like a coward. Only you and I and God will know the truth. That's inner heroism." I said. It was not unusual, of course, to hear them contradict themselves, but I would have liked it if he'd stuck to one single version, either that they would know and sing his tragedy, or that they wouldn't. So it would have been, in a poem, surely, if Unferth were a character, good or evil, heroic or not. But reality, alas, is essentially shoddy. I let out a sigh. He jerked his head up, shocked. "Does nothing have value in your horrible ruin of a brain?" I waited. The whole shit-ass scene was his idea, not mine. I saw the light dawning in his eyes. "I understand," he said. I thought he would laugh at the bottomless stupidity of my cynicism, but while the laugh was still starting at the corners of his eyes, another look came, close to fright. "You think me deluded, tricked by my own walking fairy tale. You think I came without a hope of winning, came to escape indignity by suicide." He did laugh now, not amused, sorrowful and angry. The laugh died quickly. "I didn't know how deep the pool was," he said. "I had a chance. I knew I had no more than that. It's all a hero asks for." I sighed. The word hero was beginning to grate. He was an idiot. I could crush him like a fly. But I held back. "Go ahead, scoff," he said, petulant. "Except in the life of a hero, the whole world's meaningless. The hero sees values beyond what's possible. That's the nature of a hero. It kills him, of course, ultimately, but it makes the whole struggle of humanity worthwhile." I nodded in the darkness. "And breaks up the boredom," I said. He raised up on his elbows, and the effort of it made his shoulders shake. "One of us is going to die tonight. Does that break up your boredom?" "It's not true," I said. "A few minutes from now, I'm going to carry you back to Hrothgar, safe and sound. So much for poetry." "I'll kill myself," he whispered. He shook violently now. "Up to you," I answered reasonably. "But you'll admit it may seem at least a trifle cowardly to some." His fists closed, and his teeth clenched. Then he relaxed and lay flat. I waited for him to find an answer. Minutes passed. It came to me that he had quit. He had glimpsed a glorious ideal, had struggled toward it, and seized it, and come to understand it, and was disappointed. One could sympathize. He was asleep. I picked him up gently, and carried him home. I laid him at the door of Hrothgar's mead hall, still asleep, killed the 2 guards so I wouldn't be misunderstood, and left. He lives on, bitter, feebly challenging my midnight raids from time to time, 3 times this summer, crazy with shame that he alone is always spared, and furiously jealous of the dead. I laugh when I see him. He throws himself at me, or he cunningly sneaks up behind, sometimes in disguise, a goat, a dog, a sickly old woman, and I roll on the floor with laughter. So much for heroism. So much for the harvest virgin. So much, also, for the alternative visions of blind old poets and dragons. Chapter 7. Balance is everything. Riding out time like a helmless sheep-boat, keel to hellward, mast upreared to prick out heaven's eye. Hee hee. Sigh. My enemies define themselves, as the dragon said, on me. As for myself, I could finish them off in a single night, pull down the great carved beams and crush them in the mead hall, along with their mice, their tankards and potatoes. Yet I hold back. I am hardly blind to the absurdity. Form is function. What will we call the Hrothgar wrecker when Hrothgar has been wrecked? Do a little dance, beast. Shrug it off. This looks like a nice place. Ooh, my, flat rock, moonlight, views of distances. Sing. Pity poor Hrothgar, Grendel's foe. Pity poor Grendel, oh, oh, oh. Winter soon. Whispering, whispering. Grendel, has it occurred to you, my dear, that you are crazy? He clasps hands delicately over his head, points the toes of one foot. Aye, horrible nails. Takes a step, does a turn. Grendel is crazy, oh, 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 thinks old Hrothgar makes it snow. Balances everything. Tiding out rhyme. Pity poor Grengar, Hrothdel's foe. Down goes the whirlpool. Eek! No, no. It will be winter soon. Midway through the 12th year of my idiotic war. 12 is, I hope, a holy number. Number of escapes from traps. He searches the moonlit world for signs, shading his eyes against the dimness, standing on one shaggy foot, just slightly blood-stained, one toe missing from an old encounter with an axe. 3 dead trees on the moor below, burned up alive by lightning, are ominous portents. Oh, man, us portents. Also trees. On a frost-bitten hill in the distance, men on horses. Over here, he screams, waves his arms. They hesitate, feign deafness, ride away north. Shoddy, he observes. The whole chilly universe. Shoddy. Enough of that. A night for tearing heads off, bathing in blood, except, alas, he has killed his quota for the season. Care, take care of the gold-egg-laying goose. There is no limit to desire but desire's needs. Grendel's law. The scent of the dragon. Heavy all around me, almost visible before me, like my breath. I will count my numberless blessings one by one. 1. My teeth are sound. 1. The roof of my cave is sound. 1. I have not committed the ultimate act of nihilism. I have not killed the queen. 1. Yet. He lies on the cliff edge, scratching his belly, and thoughtfully watches his thoughtfully watching the queen. Not easy to define. Mathematically, perhaps a torus, loosely cylindrical, with swellings and constrictions at intervals, knobbed, that is to say, a surface generated, more or less, by the revolutions of a conic about an axis lying in its plane, and the solid thus enclosed.